Imagine seeing a creature snap its own broken bone back into place and smile through the pain. Picture witnessing someone cauterize their own wound with a burning hot knife, not even flinching as flesh sizzles. Or watching as they stitch up a gaping cut without anesthetic, humming a cheerful tune while doing it. Sounds like something from a horror movie, right? Well, for many species across the galaxy, that's just humans being humans. And let me tell you, it freaks them the hell out. My name is Kavrik. I'm what you'd call a veteran xenobiologist, though that fancy title doesn't begin to cover the nightmares I've collected from my years working alongside humans. Today I'm going to tell you about the time I had to explain human first aid to a class of alien military cadets, and why half of them needed therapy afterward. You think your high school health class was rough? Try explaining to a room full of sheltered alien teenagers why humans sometimes need to amputate their own limbs to survive. Makes the reproductive system lecture seem tame by comparison. I never wanted to be a teacher. Let's get that straight from the start. When Admiral Zelvani ordered me to give a series of lectures at Trivani Prime Military Academy, I was still recovering from 3 broken ribs, a shattered femur, and the kind of psychological trauma that makes you wake up screaming at 0300 hours. The doctors said I needed at least another 3 months of rehabilitation. The Admiral said I needed to share my expertise. As usual, the Admiral won. It wasn't just the injuries that made me reluctant. Trivani Prime had rejected my application 20 years ago for being physically inadequate. In their defense, I was a scrawny kid with more enthusiasm than muscle. But rejection leaves scars deeper than any battlefield wound. Now they wanted me to walk through those same pristine halls as some kind of honored guest lecturer. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I stood outside the lecture hall adjusting my uniform to hide the medical exoskeleton still supporting my left leg, I caught my reflection in a polished wall panel. My deep green scales had lost some of their luster, now lined with pale scars like a roadmap of past missions. My broad frame, which had filled out considerably since my rejection, now carried the subtle slump of someone who's seen too much. I straightened my posture. They wouldn't see weakness today. The doors slid open with an elegant whoosh, far too quiet compared to the industrial clank of human spaceships I'd grown accustomed to. Inside, 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Young cadets barely passed their first molting with spotless uniforms and expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed awe. They'd been told they were meeting a hero, if they only knew. Cadets' attention. Professor Lanaya's voice cut through the murmurs. She was one of the few Trivanians I actually respected, a battle-hardened officer who'd retired to teaching after losing her right arm in the Proxima conflict. Unlike the other instructors, she'd seen real combat, not just simulations. Today, we have the honor of hosting Commander Kavrik Dentrex, Xenobiological Liaison Officer from the Joint Galactic Human Exploration Initiative. Commander Dentrex has spent the last 5 Earth years embedded with human military and scientific teams, studying their behaviors and biology in extreme conditions. I nodded stiffly as she continued with my credentials. 5 years. Had it really been that long since I first stepped aboard a human vessel? It felt both longer and shorter somehow. The commander will be sharing insights about human emergency medical practices, knowledge that could save your lives if you ever find yourselves working alongside human teams. Linnea turned to me with a respectful nod. Commander, they're all yours. I limped to the center stage, ignoring the whispers about my injury. These kids had probably never seen real combat wounds before. Everything here was too clean, too theoretical. That was about to change. So, Bawam. I began letting my voice carry the weariness I felt. You want to know about humans and how they handle injuries in the field. Let me start by saying this. Forget everything you think you know about them from your textbooks and training vids. Those sterilized accounts don't begin to capture what these beings are truly capable of when survival is on the line. Whoa. One cadet in the front row, a young female with scales so bright they practically shimmered with youth, raised her hand tentatively. Sir, our instruction manual states that humans are a Class 3 species with moderate resilience and notable technological medical advancements. Is that incorrect? I couldn't help the harsh laugh that escaped me. Cadet trying to classify humans using our standard metrics is like trying to categorize a quantum particle using classical physics. It simply doesn't work. I activated the holographic display and brought up an image of a human female in a standard field medic uniform. Average height, lean build, nothing remarkable except for the intensity in her eyes. This is Lieutenant Isla Grant. When I first met her aboard the Orion Spear, I made the mistake of dismissing her as physically unimpressive. She was smaller than most humans in the crew, quiet, and seemed to avoid confrontation. I categorized her exactly as your manuals would suggest, a moderately resilient organism with technological dependency. I paused, letting the image rotate slowly. 3 months later, I watched her perform surgery on herself using a combat knife dental floss and a flask of something humans call whiskey, all while trapped in a collapsed mining tunnel with toxic gas slowly filling the air. I smiled grimly at their shocked expressions. Your manuals need updating. A ripple of discomfort moved through the classroom. Good. They needed to be uncomfortable. Comfort gets you killed when dealing with humans. My first day aboard the Orion Spear was a masterclass in cultural confusion. The human vessel was nothing like our streamlined, efficiency-focused ships. It was a chaotic labyrinth of corridors, personal quarters, decorated with items of no apparent value, and common areas where crew members engaged in recreational activities even during duty hours. Captain Mason Hale greeted me in what they called the mess hall, a strange name for a communal eating space, though I would later learn the aptness of this description after witnessing humans eat. Commander Dentrex, Hale said, extending his hand in the customary human greeting ritual. Welcome aboard. Hope you don't mind the informal reception. We're between missions, so things are a bit relaxed. Hale was a contradiction, a physical powerhouse with forearms like support struts and shoulders that barely fit through standard doorways. Yet his voice carried a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing presence. His face bore the marks of past battles, a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and a burn mark along the right jawline. Yet his eyes held a warmth that put you strangely at ease. I appreciate the welcome, Captain, I replied awkwardly, gripping his hand and trying not to wince at the force of his shake. Your vessel is not what I expected. Hale laughed, a booming sound that caused several crew members to glance over with amused expressions. They were clearly used to their captain's volume. Yeah, we're not much for the sterile, minimalist aesthetic you folks prefer. Humans need a bit of chaos to feel at home. He gestured around the room. Speaking of which, let me introduce you to some of the team. What followed was a bewildering parade of names, faces, and what humans call small talk, an oddly inefficient form of communication that seemed designed to exchange minimal information over maximum time. Most striking was how the humans had organized themselves into informal groups, cliques. They called them based on shared interests, backgrounds, or simply compatible personality types. This ran counter to everything in our military structure, where assignments were based solely on aptitude and efficiency metrics. And over there, Hale continued, pointing to a small table in the corner. That's our medical team. 3 humans sat huddled over what appeared to be a game board, arguing intensely, but with obvious affection. The smallest of them, a female with short dark hair and quick, precise hand movements, seemed to be winning, judging by the frustrated expressions of her companions. The one taking everyone's dessert rations is Lieutenant Isla Grant, our chief field medic. Don't let the size fool you. She's the most terrifying person on this ship when she needs to be. I studied her with skepticism. By Tervanian standards, she looked physically inadequate for any combat role. Her frame was slight, her arms lacking the muscle definition of the security personnel. If I hadn't known better, I would have assumed she was an administrative officer or perhaps a communications specialist. Terrifying, I asked, unable to hide my doubt. Hale's expression shifted subtly, a knowing smile that I would come to recognize as a warning sign. You'll see him, was all he said. Over the next few weeks, I observed the strange behaviors that seemed universal among humans yet baffling to other species. They joked during moments of stress, actual humor, when situations were at their most dire. During a reactor coolant leak that threatened the entire engineering deck, I witnessed 2 technicians exchanging what they called gallows humor, while racing to prevent a catastrophic overload. Their temperature tolerances were mind-boggling. I once found a security officer named Rodriguez sitting in a maintenance sauna at 50 degrees Celsius, casually reading a physical book, an artifact dating back to pre-space human culture. When I expressed concern, she simply shrugged and said, "Reminds me of summer back home." Most peculiar was their constant need for what they termed coffee, a bitter stimulant that seemed to function as both fuel and social lubricant. The ship's operations practically revolved around the dispensers of this dark liquid, with crew members becoming irritable and less efficient when supplies ran low. But it was their approach to injury that truly defied comprehension. A crew member named Chen smashed his hand while repairing a cargo loader, bones visibly broken, blood pooling on the deck. Instead of immediately seeking medical attention, he wrapped the injury in a cloth, secured it with adhesive tape, and continued working for another hour before his supervisor forced him to visit the medical bay. When I questioned this behavior, Chen looked genuinely confused. "It could still work," he said, as if a partially functioning limb was sufficient reason to delay treatment. This was my first glimpse into the human philosophy of medical care, a pragmatic approach that prioritized continued functionality over comfort or proper healing protocols. Little did I know how extreme this philosophy could become. As the cadets listened to these anecdotes, I could see their expressions shifting from fascination to unease. Good. They needed to understand that textbook knowledge about humans was worse than useless. It was dangerously misleading. "Sir," one of the male cadets interjected, his scales rippling with nervous energy, "are you suggesting that humans ignore injuries?" "Not ignore, cadet. They acknowledge the injury, assess its impact on their operational capacity, and then make a cost-benefit analysis about immediate treatment versus mission completion." I paused, remembering countless examples, and their threshold for what constitutes still operational would horrify your medical trainers. Another cadet, bolder than the rest, asked the question I could see forming in all their minds. "But what about pain? Do they not experience it as we do?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, considering how to answer. Humans feel pain arguably more intensely than we do, given their dense nerve structures. But they've developed a cultural relationship with pain that's unique in the galaxy. They don't just endure it, they expect it. Some even seem to take pride in their capacity to function despite it. Professor Linnea, who had been silently observing from the side, stepped forward. "Commander, perhaps you could share a specific example, something from your field experience." I nodded slowly, the memories flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. "Let me tell you about our mission to Nexus 9, or as the humans came to call it, Hell's Playground. 6 months into my assignment aboard the Orion Spear, we received orders to investigate an uncharted planet designated Nexus 9. Initial scans suggested potential rare mineral deposits valuable for quantum computing. Standard exploration mission, or so we thought. The briefing room buzzed with the usual pre-mission energy, humans checking equipment, reviewing data, engaging in their ritual of coffee loading before deployment. Captain Hale stood before the holographic projection of our landing zone, pointing out areas of interest. "Atmospheric composition shows higher oxygen content than Earth normal," he explained, highlighting a dense jungle section. "Vegetation is going to be aggressive and oversized. Gravity is about 1.2 times what we're used to. Nothing we can't handle, but it'll make everything heavier and more tiring." Lieutenant Grant was methodically organizing her medical pack nearby inventory spreadsheet. Hovering above her workspace, I noticed she was packing twice the usual number of clotting agents and pain suppressors. "Expecting trouble, Lieutenant?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but genuinely curious about her preparations. She didn't look up from her task. "High oxygen environments mean bigger predators with nasty defense mechanisms. Toxins, venoms, and natural weapons tend to evolve to extreme levels." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking each supply. "Better to have and not need, Commander." I remember feeling a chill at her matter-of-fact assessment. Humans had an uncanny instinct for danger, an evolutionary gift from their predatory past. Our landing team consisted of 15 personnel, Captain Hale, Lieutenant Grant's medical team, several security officers, science specialists, and myself as the xenobiological consultant. We boarded the exploration shuttle, a vessel humans affectionately called the Brick, due to its distinctly unelegant design. The descent started routinely enough. Atmospheric entry was bumpy, but within parameters. It wasn't until we hit the lower atmosphere that things went catastrophically wrong. "Captain, I'm picking up massive electromagnetic readings," the sensor operator shouted, her hands flying over the controls. "Pattern suggests artificial origin." Hale's posture changed instantly. "Defensive measures, full shield deployment, comm blackout protocol." Before anyone could react further, something slammed into our hull. The shuttle lurched violently, throwing several crew members from their seats. Warning alarms blared as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. Energy to weapon the tactical officer confirmed, voice steady despite the chaos. Unknown configuration. Engine 2 is gone, the pilot reported grimly. We're losing altitude control. Captain Hale strapped himself back into his command chair. All hands braced for hard landing. Emergency protocols active. What happened next is still somewhat fragmentary in my memory. The shuttle spiraled downward, breaking through the canopy of massive trees. Metal screamed as branches tore at the hull. A section of the ceiling collapsed, crushing equipment and narrowly missing personnel. I remember Lieutenant Grant moving through the chaos with impossible balance, securing injured crew members, applying pressure bandages to bleeding wounds, all while being thrown about like a rag doll herself. The impact when we hit the ground knocked me unconscious. I woke to the acrid smell of electrical fires and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The shuttle's interior was barely recognizable. Twisted metal shattered displays, emergency lighting flickering weakly. Someone was calling for a medical assessment. Someone else was trying to extinguish a fire near the oxygen supply. Through my dazed state, I could hear Captain Hale organizing survivors with remarkable calm. Perimeter security teams of 2, Rodriguez, get that communications array cobbled together if you can. Grant triage in the center section. Chen inventory what supplies survived. I tried to stand and immediately collapsed, a white-hot spike of pain shooting through my left leg. Looking down, I saw the problem. A metal strut had pierced my thigh, the wound already seeping dark green blood onto the deck. Don't move, Commander. Lieutenant Grant appeared beside me, her face smudged with soot and a cut above her right eye dripping blood that she seemed completely unaware of. That's through your femoral artery. Move the wrong way and you'll bleed out in minutes. She assessed the injury with clinical detachment, her earlier prediction about packing extra supplies now seeming unnervingly prophetic. I need to stabilize this before we can move you. The shuttle isn't secure, atmosphere's leaking in, and whatever shot us down might come looking to finish the job. As she prepared her equipment, I heard a crewman by one of the shattered viewports swear loudly. Captain, you need to see this. Captain Hale limped over his own leg, clearly injured but functional, and peered outside. His expression hardened. Well, that complicates things, he muttered. Lieutenant Grant looked up from my injury. What is it? Let's just say the local wildlife makes Earth's dinosaurs look like petting zoo attractions. He turned back to the crew. New priority, we need to fortify this position. Now. Grant nodded and returned to treating my wound, her hands steady despite the new threat. This is going to hurt, Commander, a lot. We don't have time for proper anesthesia, and I need to save the strong painkillers for later. Before I could properly process this statement, she had injected something into my leg that dulled the edge of the pain without eliminating it. Then with precise movements, as she cut away my uniform around the wound and began the process of extracting the metal shard. Every movement sent waves of agony through my body, but I bit down on the leather strap she'd placed between my teeth and endured. I had seen humans undergo similar field treatments without complaint. My pride demanded I show equal resilience. Almost got it, she murmured, focused entirely on her work. The good news is your physiology means you won't bleed out as quickly as a human would. The bad news is a thunderous impact shook the shuttle, cutting off her explanation. Something massive had struck the hull from outside. Perimeter breach in Section 3, someone shouted from the front of the shuttle. Captain Hale's voice rose above the sudden commotion. Active defense, Rodriguez, Chen, containment protocols. Grant's expression never changed, her hands never faltered. She completed the extraction with one smooth motion, immediately pressing a clotting pack to the wound. The bad news, she continued as if there had been no interruption, is that we're about to have company and you can't walk. The sounds of energy, weapons, and shaws filled the shuttle. Through the haze of pain, I caught glimpses of movement outside the broken viewport. Something huge, multi-limbed, with an exoskeleton that gleamed like polished obsidian. What is that thing? I gasped as Grant finished binding my wound. She spared a quick glance toward the commotion before returning to her work. Something between a centipede and a tank from the looks of it, and definitely carnivorous judging by those mandibles. Her casual assessment of the monster trying to rip through our hull was almost as shocking as the creature itself. How could she remain so calm? "Captain," she called out, "Commander Dentrex is stabilized but immobile. We need an extraction plan." Hale appeared as if summoned, firing an energy rifle one-handed toward the breach while surveying my condition with a quick practice glance. "No extraction until we secure the perimeter," he decided. "That thing's not alone. Sensors show at least 5 more approaching from the east." He turned to Grant. "Can you move him yourself if needed?" She nodded without hesitation. "Get me Rodriguez's exoframe. I can carry him." The captain disappeared back into the fray while Grant continued working on my injury, now applying a temporary sealant that burned like acid as it closed the wound. "What's happening?" I asked, trying to see past her to the battle. "Nothing good," she replied honestly. "We're on a planet we know nothing about, surrounded by apex predators, possibly being hunted by whoever shot us down with limited supplies and no immediate rescue prospects." She secured the final bandage with surprising gentleness. "Standard Tuesday for the Orion's spear." I stared at her, searching for signs of the fear any rational being should be experiencing. There was none. Just focused determination and perhaps a hint of excitement. These humans were incomprehensible. The sounds of battle intensified. I could hear Captain Hale coordinating the defense voices shouting about ammunition counts and structural integrity. And through it all, Lieutenant Grant methodically prepared me for emergency transport as if we were conducting a routine drill. "When Rodriguez brings the exo frame, I'm going to strap you to my back," she explained, checking my vital signs on her portable scanner. "It won't be comfortable, but it'll keep you alive until we reach a more defensible position." "And where exactly is that?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. She surprised me with a small, grim smile. "No idea. We'll figure it out as we go. That's what humans do best." The shuttle rocked with another impact metal, screaming as something tore through the hull plating. Emergency lights flickered, then died, plunging us into semi-darkness, broken only by the flash of weapon fire. "Time's up," Grant muttered, glancing toward the new breach. "Change of plans." Without warning, she hoisted me up with strength I wouldn't have believed possible for her frame supporting my weight while keeping pressure off my injured leg. "Captain," she shouted over the cacophony, "moving the commander now. Cover the northeast exit." We began a painful, awkward progress toward what had once been an emergency airlock, but was now a jagged hole in the shuttle's side. Each step sent lightning bolts of pain through my leg, despite Grant's efforts to buffer the movement. Outside, Nexus 9 revealed itself in all its savage glory. Trees towered hundreds of meters above us, their trunks wider than buildings. The air was thick with moisture and the heady scent of alien vegetation. And moving through this primeval landscape were shadows that defied description, massive forms slithering between distant trees, winged shapes circling overhead, and the chitinous nightmares that had attacked our shuttle. "Hell's playground," Grant whispered, following my gaze upward. "That's what this place is." She wasn't wrong. As I recounted this part of the story to the wide-eyed cadets, I could see the tension in their postures, the rippling of their scale patterns betraying their growing unease. They were no longer viewing this as an academic exercise. They were beginning to understand the reality of field operations alongside humans. "Sir," one of the braver cadets ventured, "what happened next? How did you escape?" I let out a long breath, the memory still vivid even after all this time. We didn't escape, not cleanly anyway. What followed was 48 hours of the most tense survival situation I've ever experienced. And it was during those hours that I witnessed firsthand what human emergency medicine truly looks like. Professor Lanaya stepped forward, her expression grave. "Commander, perhaps we should take a brief recess before continuing. Some of our cadets appear distressed." Indeed, several of the younger students were showing physical signs of stress. Rapid breathing, dilated pupils, scale discoloration. I'd forgotten how sheltered academy training could be. "Very well," I conceded. 10 minutes, use it to collect yourselves. Because what comes next is why I'm standing here today with a leg that still works, and why human medical practices are both the most horrifying and most effective emergency techniques in the known galaxy. When we reconvened, the atmosphere in the lecture hall had changed. The initial excited curiosity had given way to something more solemn. Good. They were finally beginning to understand that this wasn't just another classroom exercise. After escaping the shuttle, I continued, Our situation deteriorated rapidly. The thick jungle limited visibility to mere meters. Communication equipment was damaged beyond repair. And the local predators seemed to view our crash site as a dinner bell. Captain Hale organized the survivors into a defensive formation, walking wounded in the center, combat-capable personnel forming a perimeter. Lieutenant Grant moved between injured crew members, triaging and treating as we pushed through the dense undergrowth. We need higher ground, Hale decided after consulting his partially functioning scanner. Readings suggest a ridge about 2 kilometers northeast. Better defensive position might get enough elevation for emergency signals. Those 2 kilometers might as well have been 1,000. Each step was agony for my injured leg. The planet's higher gravity made every movement more demanding. And something was following us. We could hear chitinous limbs moving through the canopy above, catching glimpses of gleaming exoskeletons between the massive leaves. Lieutenant Grant stayed close to me, monitoring my vital signs while simultaneously scanning the surroundings for threats. The other injured crew members were similarly paired with combat personnel. Heart rate, elevated respiration becoming irregular, she muttered, reading my biometrics from her wrist scanner. We need to rest soon or risk shock. Captain Hale overheard. 5 more minutes, then we take defensive positions for a brief stop. Rodriguez, scout ahead, find us something we can fortify. Rodriguez, a security specialist with enhanced optical implants, nodded and disappeared into the foliage with practiced silence. She returned minutes later, face grim. Clearing ahead, natural rock formation provides some cover on 3 sides. But, she hesitated. But what specialist? Hale prompted. There's evidence of previous visitors, sir. Not recent, but artificial structures. Alien in design. This news sent a ripple of tension through the group. Whoever had shot us down might have had a presence here. Defensive posture, minimal noise, Hale ordered. Grant triage protocol once we reach the position. We reached the clearing. Rodriguez had found a semicircular rock formation with a small cave opening at its base. Perfect for defensive purposes, except for the unmistakable signs of previous occupation. Strange markings carved into the stone remnants of what might have been technological equipment long abandoned. Lieutenant Grant helped me to the cave entrance, setting me down with my back against the cool stone. The temporary respite from movement was blissful, but the throbbing in my leg had intensified. The field dressing was soaked through with green blood. That doesn't look good, she observed, kneeling to examine the wound. She pressed a medical scanner against my leg and frowned at the readings. Internal bleeding continuing. The temporary seal isn't holding. Wanted Captain Hale joined us, his own limp more pronounced now. How bad? Bad enough, Grant replied, her voice clinically detached. The arterial damage is worse than I thought. Field dressing won't hold much longer. He needs proper surgery, which we can't provide until rescue, Hale concluded, surveying our makeshift camp. What are his options? They discussed my fate with the pragmatic efficiency I'd come to expect from humans, weighing risked resources and survival probabilities, while I sat there fully conscious and increasingly alarmed. There is one option, Grant said, finally lowering her voice. It's experimental. We've had success with human subjects, but never tried it on Tervanian physiology. Hale's expression was unreadable. Survival probability. With it, maybe 60%. Without it, and she glanced at my rapidly deteriorating vitals. 20 at best, and that's being optimistic. The captain nodded once. Do it. I'll take responsibility. Only then did either of them address me directly. Lieutenant Grant knelt beside me, her expression softening slightly. Commander, I need to perform an emergency procedure. It's invasive, painful, and not officially approved for your species, but it's your best chance. The matter-of-fact way she presented my likely death was almost as shocking as the wound itself. What does this procedure involve? I managed to ask through the haze of pain. I'm going to use a bone stapler to repair your femoral artery, seal the surrounding tissue with a coagulation spray, and then stabilize the bone with an emergency osteofusion rod. Even in my compromised state, I understood the implications. That equipment is calibrated for humans. The intensity settings would be potentially traumatic for your system, she finished. Yes, that's why I need your consent. Behind her, I could see Captain Hale organizing the perimeter defense personnel, taking positions among the rocks with energy rifles charged. The distant sounds of large creatures moving through the jungle punctuated our conversation. What choice did I have? Do it, I said. Grant nodded once, then turned to prepare her equipment. I watched in horrified fascination as she laid out instruments that looked more like mechanical tools than medical devices. A wicked-looking device with metal prongs that must be the bone stapler, canisters of spray, injectable compounds with warning labels I couldn't read from my position, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be a thin metal rod with screw-like threads. No anesthetic, I asked, noticing the absence of pain suppression equipment. Limited supplies, she explained, prepping a local numbing agent. Need to save the full anesthetic for more critical cases. This will help, but won't eliminate the pain. I need you conscious anyway to monitor neurological responses. She called over another crew member, a burly security officer named Tanner. I need you to hold him still, absolutely still, no matter what. Tanner nodded grimly and positioned himself behind me, strong arms ready to restrain my movements. The casual acceptance of the impending pain, both mine and theirs, was typically human. Lieutenant Grant met my eyes one last time. Ready, Commander. I wasn't. How could anyone be? But I nodded anyway. What followed was difficult to describe adequately. The local numbing agent dulled the initial incision, but nothing could prepare me for the sensation of the bone stapler clamping onto my damaged artery. The device was designed to exert enough pressure to join human blood vessels, significantly tougher than Tervanian ones. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I screamed. Of course I screamed. Anyone would have. But Grant never flinched, never hesitated. Her hands remained perfectly steady as she worked with mechanical precision. Arterial seal holding, she murmured more to herself than anyone else, moving to bone stabilization. The osteofusion rod was worse. Designed to penetrate and temporarily reinforce fractured human bones, it felt like molten metal being poured into my femur. Tanner held me immobile despite my instinctive struggles, his grip unyielding, but not cruel. Through the red haze of agony, I observed Lieutenant Grant's expression, the intense concentration, the micro-adjustments to technique, the complete absence of disgust or hesitation that would mark most medical practitioners performing such brutal procedures. In one particularly lucid moment, I realized something that haunts me still. She was enjoying this. Not in a sadistic way. There was no pleasure taken in my pain. But the challenge, the high-stakes improvisation, the opportunity to apply her skills in extreme conditions, these energized her. This was what she had trained for. Almost done, she announced, applying the coagulation spray to seal the wound. The chemical reaction generated heat, causing the surrounding tissue to contract painfully. Tanner, keep him steady for 30 more seconds. The final stage involved injecting a cocktail of antibiotics, coagulants, and anti-inflammatory compounds directly into the wound site. By this point, I was barely conscious, floating in and out of awareness. Procedure complete, I heard Grant say, her voice seeming to come from very far away. Vital signs stabilizing. He'll live, Captain. Good work, Lieutenant, Hale's voice responded. Because we've got company. The sound of energy weapons discharging brought me partially back to consciousness. Through blurred vision, I saw the defensive perimeter engaging with multiple large creatures, the same chitinous nightmares that had attacked the shuttle, now hunting us through the jungle. Despite having just performed emergency surgery in field conditions, Lieutenant Grant immediately transitioned to combat mode, drawing her sidearm while simultaneously securing my newly treated leg in a temporary brace. Tanner, get him deeper into the cave, she ordered. I'm joining the defense line. As Tanner dragged me to safety, I watched Grant move with fluid efficiency to the perimeter, taking up position beside Captain Hale. Their coordination was wordless, a nod, a hand signal, and they were working in perfect tandem to hold back the encroaching predators. The battle that followed was chaotic, but even in my compromised state, I recognized the tactical brilliance of the human defense. They used the natural rock formation to funnel the attackers' conserved ammunition with precise shots and rotated positions to prevent fatigue. And through it all, my newly repaired leg throbbed with a pain so intense, it seemed to have its own heartbeat, a constant reminder of the brutal efficiency of human emergency medicine. In the Academy lecture hall, I could see the cadets' reactions to this part of the story. Several looked physically ill. Others sat rigidly, scales flat against their bodies, in the Tervanian expression of extreme stress. Even Professor Lanaya appeared disturbed. You're telling us one cadet finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper, that human medics routinely perform such procedures without proper anesthesia in field conditions. Not routinely, I clarified, but when necessary without hesitation. Another cadet raised a trembling hand, and the human female enjoyed this process. I considered how to explain. Not the pain, never that, but the challenge, yes. Humans have a particular relationship with adversity. They don't merely endure it, they measure themselves against it. Lieutenant Grant wasn't taking pleasure in suffering, but in overcoming an impossible situation and defying death through skill and will. Professor Lanaya stepped forward. Commander, our medical training emphasizes patient comfort and minimal trauma. What you're describing sounds like torture, regardless of the necessity. By our standards it is, I acknowledged, and that's precisely why I'm here today. Because if you ever find yourselves in a joint operation with humans, you need to understand this fundamental difference. They will save your life by any means necessary, regardless of pain, regardless of proper protocol, regardless of long-term consequences. I let that sink in before continuing. And if you apply our cultural standards to their methods, you will die when you could have lived. As I reached the conclusion of my story, the atmosphere in the lecture hall had transformed completely. Gone was the initial excitement and curiosity, replaced by a somber understanding that seemed to age the young cadets before my eyes. The rest of our time on Nexus 9 followed a similar pattern, I told them. 48 hours of continuous movement, combat and survival. Lieutenant Grant changed my dressings twice more each time, without anesthetic, each time with the same mechanical precision. By the end of the second day, my leg had stabilized enough for limited weight bearing, something that should have been medically impossible according to Trevanian physiology. I paused, remembering the moment when rescue finally arrived, a heavy tactical shuttle breaking through the atmosphere, guided by the emergency beacon we'd managed to activate from that ridge. When the rescue team found us, they were astonished that we'd survived at all. Nexus 9 has since been classified as a Class 5 Deathworld, essentially uninhabitable, without extensive support systems. Yet 17 of the original 20 crew members made it off that planet alive, many with injuries that should have been fatal. A cadet near the back one, who had remained silent throughout my account, finally spoke up. Sir, with respect, this sounds more like a horror story than a lecture on medical practices. I nodded, acknowledging his perspective. It is horrifying, by our standards, by the standards of most galactic species. But here's what you need to understand. What I need you to take away from this session: humans don't use these methods because they're cruel or primitive. They use them because they refuse to accept death when there's even the slimmest chance of survival. I gestured to my left leg, now supporting my weight despite the lingering pain. By all medical logic, I should have lost this leg. The damage to the artery, the bone, the surrounding tissue, our medical protocols would have dictated amputation to prevent further complications. Lieutenant Grant refused that outcome, not because it was easier or less painful, but because she believed there was a better way. Professor Lanaya stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. Commander, are you suggesting that human medical practices are superior to our own? Not superior, I clarified. Different, evolved under different pressures. Humans come from a world that tried to kill them at every turn: predators, diseases, natural disasters, even other humans. Their medical practices reflect that history, prioritizing survival above all else, willing to inflict short-term suffering for long-term viability. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each cadet in turn. What I am saying is this: if you find yourself bleeding out on a battlefield with no medical transport in sight, you'd better hope there's a human nearby. They'll hurt you savagely, and they'll save your life. A silence fell over the lecture hall as they processed this. I could see the conflict in their expressions, the ingrained belief in our own superior civilization battling with the uncomfortable truth I was presenting. Finally, one of the female cadets, the bright-scaled one who had asked the first question, raised her hand again. Sir, you said Lieutenant Grant took no pleasure in your pain but in overcoming the challenge. Can you explain what you mean by that? I nodded, grateful for the perceptive question. Humans have a concept they call triumph over adversity. They don't just want to survive, they want to overcome to conquer the impossible. When Lieutenant Grant performed that procedure, she wasn't simply executing medical protocols. She was engaged in a battle against death itself. Her enemy wasn't my body or my pain, it was the possibility of failure. I tapped my datapad, bringing up an image on the main display, a group photo taken aboard the Orion Spear after our rescue. Lieutenant Grant stood beside me, both of us bandaged but alive, her expression not one of pride or superiority, but of quiet satisfaction. Later, when I was recovering in the medical bay, I asked her how she could do what she did, how any being could inflict such pain, even for the right reasons. Her answer has stayed with me ever since. I paused, making sure they were listening carefully. She said life is precious enough to be worth the pain, always, without exception. The cadets exchanged glances, some nodding slowly in reluctant understanding. That I continued is the core of human medical philosophy. It isn't about comfort or dignity or protocol. It's about the absolute unyielding conviction that every life is worth saving, no matter the methods required. Professor Lanaya studied me with new understanding. And that's why you requested this assignment, isn't it, Commander, despite your history with this institution? I smiled faintly. Perceptive as always, Professor, yes. Because these cadets need to understand what I didn't when I first boarded the Orion Spear. Humans don't practice medicine the way they do because they're barbaric. They do it because they value life so deeply that they'll endure anything to preserve it. Looking around the room one last time, I delivered my final point. If you take nothing else from this lecture, remember this: a human medic will break your bones, staple your arteries, cauterize your wounds without anesthesia, and inflict pain you cannot imagine, not because they're cruel, but because they've determined that's what's necessary to keep you alive. And in their value system, your life matters more than your suffering. I straightened my posture, ignoring the twinge from my still healing ribs. That's what makes them the most terrifying and the most valuable allies in the galaxy. As the lecture concluded, I could see the impact my words had made. These young cadets had entered the room thinking they understood humans from their textbooks and training simulations. They were leaving with the beginning of true comprehension and perhaps a healthy dose of respect, tinged with fear, which was exactly as it should be. As they filed out, a few lingered to ask additional questions. One particularly thoughtful cadet approached cautiously. "Commander, may I ask one final question?" I nodded my permission. After experiencing human medical practices firsthand, are you glad they treated you their way despite the pain? I considered the question, carefully aware that Professor Lanaya was listening nearby. 6 months ago, I would have said no, I admitted. The pain was beyond description. There were moments I wished they would simply let me die. The cadet waited for me to continue. But standing here now with a functioning leg, having survived a planet fall that should have killed us all, I gestured to indicate my fully recovered state. I've come to understand something profound about humans. They don't inflict pain because they care too little. They inflict it because they care too much. I met the cadet's eyes directly. And yes, I'm grateful. Every day. As the last students departed, Professor Lanaya approached, her expression pensive. A remarkable account, Commander. Though I suspect our medical faculty will be dealing with the fallout for some time, several cadets looked positively traumatized. I shrugged. Better traumatized in a classroom than dead in the field. She acknowledged this with a slight nod. Perhaps it is because they understand how easily life can be lost, that they fight so hard for every breath. Precisely, I agreed, surprised by her insight. They live constantly aware of their own mortality in a way most species can't comprehend. It drives everything they do, their art, their science, their medicine. They rage against death with a ferocity that's both terrifying and admirable. "And you?" she asked, studying me carefully. "Has your time among them changed you?" I smiled dryly, feeling the phantom pain in my leg, a permanent souvenir of Lieutenant Grant's battlefield surgery. "More than I can say, Professor. I now find myself evaluating risk differently, pushing through pain I would once have considered unbearable and, strangely enough, appreciating life with greater intensity." I gathered my materials, preparing to leave. I suppose that's the true legacy of human influence. They don't just save your life. They teach you how to value it. And as I limped toward the door, I heard her final question. "Would you serve with them again, knowing what you know now?" I paused, turning back with a smile that surprised even me. In a heartbeat, Professor, fear and respect aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're two sides of the same coin. Outside the academy, I gazed up at the sky, thinking about the Orion Spear and its crew, particularly a certain lieutenant who had literally held my life in her hands. They were probably halfway across the galaxy by now, saving lives with their brutal efficiency, caring too much to be gentle. And someday perhaps some of these cadets would understand, as I now did, that sometimes the greatest compassion comes disguised as cruelty, and the deepest respect for life manifests in the willingness to inflict necessary pain. It's a paradox most species never grasp, but humans, they were born understanding it. And that's what makes them the most fascinating species in the galaxy. If you've enjoyed this glimpse into the complex relationship between humans and other galactic species, there's plenty more where this came from. The universe is vast, and humanity's reputation only grows more legendary with each passing day. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to hear more tales of humanity's terrifying resilience and unexpected compassion. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Would you rather be treated by a gentle alien doctor who might let you die comfortably, or a human medic who will save your life by any means necessary? Your answers might reveal more about you than you realize. Until next time, this is Commander Kavrik Dentrex signing off.